You know what I think? I think it's just it brings to light things that wouldn't normally be brought to light.
When Hulk Hogan passed away, the world was led to believe he had peacefully gone to rest. But apparently, his daughter Brooke believes there's more to it, and she's finally ready to expose everything. She's beginning to drop the names of some WWE wrestlers, and what she's revealing will leave you speechless. Let's break it down. The shocking revelation. The wrestling world was stunned when Hulk Hogan passed away from cardiac arrest on July 24th, 2025 at the age of 71. But what should have been a simple mourning period quickly spiraled into something darker. Now, Brooke Hogan is reportedly speaking out, exposing wrestlers who may have played a role in her father's downfall, and she's not alone. Conspiracy theories have been flooding social media platforms like X and Reddit, with fans speculating that WWE figures may have had a hand in Hogan's death. The most explosive theory suggests that Vince McMahon offed Hogan because he knew too much about McMahon's sex trafficking scandal, with the timing of Hogan's death being suspiciously convenient amid McMahon's legal troubles. But what makes this theory particularly chilling is the documented history of real animosity between Hogan and wrestling's power brokers, stemming from decades of backstage manipulation and corporate betrayals that went far beyond typical wrestling politics. The conspiracy theories gained momentum when fans began connecting dots between Hogan's numerous feuds and the suspicious circumstances of his death. Social media users pointed to how computer nerds allegedly killed Scott Hall and Hulk Hogan after they spoke out, while others speculated about occult rituals involving three heroes or kings being arranged by WWE-linked groups. These theories, while seemingly outlandish, reflect a deep-seated distrust of WWE's official narrative and the company's history of covering up uncomfortable truths. Perhaps no feud was more bitter or personal than the one with Jesse the Body Ventura, whose hatred for Hogan transcended wrestling and entered the realm of real-world betrayal. When asked about the possibility of reconciling with Hogan, Ventura's response revealed the depth of his animosity.
Never.
What?
Can't trust him. I'm not friends with anyone I don't trust. And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize.
This wasn't just wrestling drama. This was a real betrayal that destroyed lives and careers. Ventura discovered Hogan's treachery during a federal deposition when Vince McMahon was under oath, confirming that Hogan was the informant who sabotaged unionization efforts in 1986. Hogan literally sold out every wrestler in the business to protect his own financial interests, earning more than the entire locker room combined, while his colleagues struggled without basic protections. The ramifications of this betrayal extended far beyond personal animosity. It fundamentally altered the trajectory of workers' rights in professional wrestling, potentially costing wrestlers millions in lost benefits and protections over the decades that followed. But Ventura wasn't alone in his hatred. Bret Hart harbored deep resentment over Hogan's backstage politics, particularly the WrestleMania 9 incident, where Hogan used his creative control to steal what should have been Hart's moment. The situation became even more contentious when Hart confronted Hogan about dropping the title to him, leading to a heated backstage confrontation that would define their relationship for years to come.
Bret lost, and Bret told me to go in the ring and wrestle, and I won the belt right after Bret wrestled him. And then the deal was for me to drop it back to Yokozuna. And then Bret got in my face. He goes, "Hey, you're supposed to drop the belt to me." I said, "No, I'm not."
This wasn't just creative differences. This was Hogan systematically using his influence to bury talent and protect his position at the top. Hart has accused Hogan of refusing to lose cleanly to him and lying about future plans, describing Hogan as someone who would say, "I'm not doing business with you," when asked to put other wrestlers over. The impact on Hart's career was significant. What should have been his defining moment as champion was stolen by Hogan's political maneuvering, forever altering the trajectory of one of wrestling's greatest technical wrestlers. The conspiracies take an even darker turn when considering Randy Savage, whose relationship with Hogan deteriorated from close friendship into real violence. Their bond, which once seemed unbreakable, became one of wrestling's most bitter personal feuds. Hogan himself has been candid about how their friendship imploded over personal jealousy and misunderstandings.
It was Macho Man. And he lived on the beach here. We were together every single day. And then when he went through a divorce, he thought I had something to do with it. That turned out to be like an 8-year don't talk to each other.
But according to documented reports, this feud went far beyond not talking. Scott Steiner corroborated claims that Savage admitted to punching Hogan and giving him a black eye before WrestleMania 9, stemming from paranoia over Hogan's relationship with Miss Elizabeth. This wasn't kayfabe. This was real violence born from real hatred. The incident reportedly left Hogan scrambling to explain his injuries, ultimately claiming they resulted from a jet ski accident rather than admitting he'd been assaulted by his former best friend. Even more disturbing are the conspiracy theories involving The Undertaker, whose early career was nearly destroyed by Hogan's false accusations. Social media speculation suggests that Hogan falsely accused The Undertaker of injuring his neck after their 1991 Survivor Series match, claiming it caused paralysis fears when video footage later proved the move was executed perfectly. Some conspiracy theorists now wonder if The Undertaker, who was nearly destroyed early in his career by Hogan's lies, might have harbored resentment that lasted decades. The incident left The Undertaker fearing for his job and reputation, having to prove his innocence against false accusations from wrestling's biggest star. The relationship with Vince McMahon himself was equally fraught, characterized by power struggles and mutual mistrust that went far beyond typical business relationships. Their dynamic was complex, built on mutual need but undermined by constant tension over creative control and business decisions.
It was a love-hate relationship, you know. He thought he knew best, I thought I knew best. So it was always a tug of war with me and him, but we seemed to click and make it work.
But this tug of war became something much more serious during the 1994 steroid trial, where Hogan testified against McMahon with immunity, admitting to shared steroid use while McMahon felt betrayed despite being acquitted. The tension from this betrayal never fully healed, and some conspiracy theorists suggest it may have played a role in the suspicious circumstances surrounding Hogan's death. McMahon's later comment that Hogan was not as big as he thinks he is revealed the underlying resentment that persisted between them for decades. Perhaps the most chilling theory involves claims that Rey Mysterio Jr. is allegedly a serial killer who murdered several wrestlers and has now been called in for questioning over the suspicious death of Hulk Hogan himself. While this sounds outlandish, it speaks to the deep suspicion that fans have about the wrestling industry's ability to cover up uncomfortable truths. The theory gained traction when fans began connecting the deaths of multiple wrestlers who had worked with Mysterio, creating a narrative of systematic elimination that, while unproven, reflects the paranoia surrounding wrestling's darker elements. The timing of Hogan's death also raised eyebrows among conspiracy theorists, particularly given claims by Bubba the Love Sponge that Hogan was on his deathbed and couldn't speak, which were vehemently denied by Hogan's team just days before his passing. The sudden shift from health denials to death announcements created a perfect storm of suspicion, with fans questioning whether WWE and Hogan's inner circle had been deliberately concealing the truth about his condition for business reasons. But if you think Hogan's enemies in wrestling were his only problem, you haven't seen anything yet, because his personal scandals and shady behavior created an entirely different set of enemies who may have had even more reason to want him gone. The dark legacy, scandals, secrets, and shady dealings. While conspiracy theories swirl around Hogan's death and his wrestling enemies, the truth is that Terry Bollea was involved in real-world scandals that destroyed relationships, ended careers, and created a legacy of controversy that would follow him to his grave. The most devastating revelation came in 2015, when leaked audio from a 2007 sex tape revealed Hogan using racial slurs repeatedly while discussing his daughter Brooke's dating life. But what made the scandal particularly explosive wasn't just the racism, it was the context in which these words were spoken, revealing a man whose private thoughts were diametrically opposed to his public persona. The leaked audio didn't just contain racial slurs, it revealed a pattern of thinking that suggested deep-seated prejudice had been carefully hidden for decades behind the wholesome Hulkamania facade. The racist remarks weren't limited to a single incident either. Additional audio surfaced revealing Hogan's concerns about being reincarnated as a black person due to karma following his son Nick's car accident, demonstrating what some described as advanced racism that went far beyond casual prejudice. These revelations painted a picture of a man whose worldview was fundamentally at odds with the values he publicly espoused, creating enemies not just among wrestling fans, but within entire communities who had once looked up to him as a role model. When finally confronted about his racist remarks, Hogan's attempts at explanation only made the situation worse, revealing the depths of his personal crisis and the extent to which his private behavior contradicted his public image.
I was at the lowest point of my life. My personal life was destroyed. I was very mad at my daughter. I was upset over a situation that happened between her and her boyfriend, and I had no idea I was being taped. I was to the point where I wanted to kill myself.
But his explanations only made things worse, as he attempted to justify his racist language by blaming his environment and upbringing. His response revealed not just the prejudice, but also a complete lack of understanding about why his words were so damaging.
Are you a racist?
No, I'm not. I'm not a racist. But a lot of people need to realize that you inherit things from your environment. And where I grew up was South Tampa, Port Tampa, And it was a really rough neighborhood, very low income. And all my friends, we greeted each other saying that word.
This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a window into decades of ingrained prejudice that had been carefully hidden behind the Hulkamania facade. The fallout was swift and devastating, with WWE terminating his contract and removing him from their Hall of Fame, essentially erasing him from wrestling history until his controversial reinstatement in 2018. The impact extended beyond WWE, with sponsors dropping him and venues canceling appearances, creating financial consequences that lasted for years. But the racism scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. The 2007 sex tape that exposed his racist views also revealed another layer of betrayal, this time involving his closest friend, Bubba the Love Sponge. The betrayal cut particularly deep because it came from someone Hogan had trusted implicitly, someone who had been given access to his most private moments.
They're pointing to a very good friend of mine, Bubba the Love Sponge, and to this day I would have to see the tape to believe that, and I haven't seen the tape because they say there's a verbal reference in a on-camera appearance after I'm gone that, puts him in the hot seat, but, he's been such a close friend.
The betrayal by Bubba the Love Sponge wasn't just personal. It was a violation of trust that would have legal and financial ramifications for years to come. The subsequent lawsuit against Gawker Media resulted in a $140 million judgment, later settled for $31 million, but the damage to relationships and reputation was irreversible. The case, notably funded by billionaire Peter Thiel due to his own grievances with Gawker, became a landmark privacy rights case that ultimately bankrupted the media outlet, but it also exposed Hogan to years of public humiliation and legal scrutiny. Perhaps even more damaging than his racist remarks or sex tape was his systematic use of steroids, which he was forced to admit during the 1994 federal trial against Vince McMahon. This wasn't just about personal drug use. This was about the culture of deception and performance enhancement. This wasn't just about personal drug use. This was about the culture of deception and performance enhancement that Hogan had helped create and perpetuate throughout the wrestling industry. His admission of using anabolic steroids for nearly 14 years, while publicly promoting a clean, wholesome image, revealed a level of hypocrisy that shocked even his most dedicated fans. The steroid scandal became even more personal when we consider its long-term impact on his health and family relationships. What began as performance enhancement evolved into a dangerous dependency that nearly cost him his life. The pharmaceutical journey that followed his wrestling career revealed a man struggling with addiction on multiple fronts.
And the thing that stopped me, the thing that shut me down completely, where I said enough's enough, is when they hit me with the fentanyl stuff. They almost killed me with that stuff. So that's when I said, I'm done.
This wasn't just about recreational drug use. This was about a man who had become so dependent on performance-enhancing and pain-killing substances that it nearly cost him his life. The extent of his pharmaceutical dependency was truly shocking, revealing a healthcare system that had failed him and a personal struggle that went far beyond anything his fans could have imagined.
And they would give me these 280 fentanyl pills, and you'd have to stuff them under your gums in the morning and then at night. And they were giving me 15 of these 1,500 milligram lollipop things to eat during the day. That's how drugged up they had me.
The pharmaceutical dependency created a vicious cycle of pain, medication, and increasingly dangerous substances that culminated in near-death experiences and hallucinations. His pharmacist reportedly said he had never seen anybody on so much fentanyl and still be alive, with the prescription costing $2,000 every 2 days, highlighting both the financial and physical toll of his addiction. The withdrawal process he described was harrowing, involving weeks of isolation, massive weight loss, and disturbing hallucinations that demonstrated just how close he had come to losing everything. Perhaps the most heartbreaking scandal was the one involving his son Nick. In 2007, Nick's reckless driving caused a car accident that left his friend, John Graziano, with permanent brain damage.
It's just something that I pray to God every day for the strength to deal with, because it's hard. There's days where I can't even get out of bed.
What should have been a moment of deep remorse instead exposed a darker side of the Hogan family. Recorded jail conversations surfaced, revealing Nick's shocking lack of empathy and cruel comments about the victim and his family. The incident shattered not only their lives, but also the illusion of a perfect family, unveiling a deep-seated dysfunction that would haunt them for years to come. Hogan made insensitive comments about the accident, suggesting it might be part of God's plan. These comments, combined with the family's wealth and celebrity status, created a public relations nightmare that further damaged Hogan's reputation as a family man and role model. The Graziano family's lawsuit and the subsequent settlement of approximately $1.5 $1.5 million only highlighted the lasting consequences of the tragedy and the family's inability to handle it with appropriate sensitivity. The pattern of lies and exaggerations that defined Hogan's public persona became increasingly apparent as stories emerged about his tendency to fabricate details about his life and career. From claiming he wrestled 400 days in a year to suggesting he was scouted by major bands like Metallica, Hogan's relationship with the truth became a running joke among wrestling fans and peers, further eroding his credibility on all matters. These fabrications weren't harmless embellishments. They were systematic deceptions that called into question everything he had ever said publicly. Even his political involvement became controversial, particularly his vocal support for Donald Trump and appearance at the 2024 Republican National Convention. His political rhetoric was inflammatory and divisive, alienating fans who had once viewed him as a unifying figure in American popular culture.
When I look out and I see all the real Americans, I think about how Donald Trump, his family was compromised. When I look out there and I see Donald Trump, I think about how his business was compromised. But what happened last week when they took a shot at my hero and they tried to kill the next president of the United States? Enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
This political involvement alienated many fans and created yet another category of people who had reasons to dislike or distrust Hogan. The pattern was clear. Throughout his life, Terry Bollea had consistently made choices that prioritized his own interests over loyalty, truth, or basic human decency. But while the wrestling world and general public were dealing with Hogan's scandals and controversies, there was one person who was witnessing it all from the inside, suffering through the consequences of being related to such a polarizing figure. The ultimate betrayal. After decades of watching her father destroy relationships, betray colleagues, and create scandal after scandal, Brooke Hogan finally reached her breaking point. But what she revealed about life inside the Hogan household wasn't just family drama. It was a damning indictment of a man whose private behavior was even worse than his public controversies, and whose treatment of his own family reveals the true character behind the Hulkamania facade. The first crack in the family's public image came during the highly publicized divorce between Hulk and Linda Hogan in 2009. But while the world saw allegations of infidelity and financial disputes, what was happening behind closed doors was far more sinister. Linda's 2011 memoir detailed extensive allegations of physical abuse by Hogan, including choking her, throwing lamps, and holding her down with hands around her throat during arguments, painting a picture of a household ruled by fear and intimidation. The divorce proceedings revealed a level of financial complexity that suggested years of hidden assets and strategic maneuvering. Linda ultimately received 70% of the couple's liquid assets, 40% ownership of Hulk's companies, and a $3 million property settlement. But the true cost was the destruction of family relationships that would never recover. The settlement left Hulk with approximately $2.98 million in liquid assets, and he later admitted the divorce brought him to the brink of bankruptcy, highlighting how his personal failures had direct financial consequences. But it wasn't until March 2025 that the full extent of the family's dysfunction became public, when Brooke Hogan broke her silence with shocking allegations that would forever change how we view wrestling's most famous family. In a lengthy Instagram post, Brooke revealed that she had been subjected to extremely verbal and mental abuse since childhood that frequently turned physical, describing a pattern of manipulation and exploitation that had lasted for decades. What made Brooke's allegations even more devastating was her revelation that she had been used as a pawn or buffer in family conflicts, and was often manipulated to defend her parents' behavior publicly, including during Hulk's 2015 racist remarks controversy. This manipulation extended far beyond family matters and into the very scandals that would define her father's legacy. She was forced to serve as the family's public defender while privately suffering from the very behavior she was asked to excuse. The psychological impact of this manipulation cannot be overstated. Brooke described being expected to forgive massive blows to her career and personal life caused by her parents' behavior, while simultaneously being asked to defend them publicly. Her decision to go no contact with both parents was based on separate reasons for each, emphasizing that the abuse came from multiple sources within the household. This wasn't just about one parent versus another. It was about a toxic family system that had failed to protect its most vulnerable member. The abuse allegations become even more significant when we hear from Brooke herself about the psychological toll of growing up in such a toxic environment. Her reflections on the family's public struggles reveal someone who had been forced to mature far beyond her years while dealing with constant media scrutiny and family dysfunction.
You know, our family's been through a lot of crap, and I will say my dad, despite, I mean, it's hard to, have all your skeletons, pulled out of your closet and just waved in front of everybody's face and humiliated the world.
But what's particularly telling is how Brooke was expected to maintain loyalty despite witnessing her father's worst behavior. The conflict between her natural love for her family and her growing awareness of their toxic behavior created an impossible situation that she struggled with for years.
It's hard, and everybody was like, oh, Brooke stands by her dad and this and that, and it's like, first of all, that's who I am. I'm loyal. Like, if you're honest with me, it doesn't matter. I will love you.
This loyalty was systematically exploited, with Brooke being forced to serve as the family's public defender while privately suffering from the very behavior she was asked to excuse. The psychological impact of this manipulation cannot be overstated. Being forced to defend the indefensible while being victimized by the same person creates a level of trauma that can last for generations. Brooke specifically mentioned being expected to defend her father during his racist remarks scandal, only to later realize she had been misled about the true nature of his comments and character. The family's dysfunction extended beyond just verbal and emotional abuse to include financial exploitation and career sabotage. Brooke revealed that she was often told that others were benefiting financially from her suffering and embarrassment, suggesting that her family's drama was being monetized in ways that directly harmed her well-being. This commercialization of family trauma added another layer of exploitation to an already toxic situation, making it clear that even her pain was seen as a potential revenue stream. The full extent of the family's medical and personal struggles became apparent when Brooke discussed her father's declining health and the impact it had on their relationship. Her detailed knowledge of his medical procedures reveals someone who, despite the abuse, had continued to care about his well-being even as their relationship deteriorated.
We counted how many surgeries he's had in the last 10 years, and I think we're at 25.
Oh, God.
So he's had both shoulders scoped, and he had his whole bicep and his bursa and his everything tied up in his shoulder like last year. That was a disaster. He got MRSA, and it was like a big thing, so we had to go back and undo it.
This physical deterioration, combined with his substance abuse issues and the stress of constant scandals, created a perfect storm that would ultimately contribute to his death in July 2025. But what makes the situation even more tragic is that Brooke was notably absent from WWE's tribute events following her father's death, later revealing that she hadn't been invited. The exclusion from her father's memorial events speaks to the deep rifts that had formed not just within the Hogan family, but between the family and the wrestling establishment. Her exclusion from WWE's memorial events wasn't just an oversight, it was a deliberate decision that highlighted how completely she had been ostracized from her father's professional legacy. The fact that her brother Nick attended while she was excluded suggests that WWE made specific choices about which family members were acceptable for their narrative and which were not. This exclusion during a time of grief added another layer of pain to an already traumatic situation. The final conversation between Brooke and her father, which took place in September 2023, reveals the ultimate tragedy of their relationship. Despite years of estrangement and abuse allegations, Brooke still told him she loved him, and he apologized, though the specifics of the apology remain unclear. This interaction occurred just 2 weeks before Hulk's wedding to Sky Daly, which Brooke did not attend, highlighting their continued estrangement even in his final years. The circumstances surrounding this final conversation are particularly telling. Brooke had reached out to express concern about his health and urge him to slow down, but he reportedly responded coldly and showed little interest in meeting her children. This interaction perfectly exemplifies the pattern of their relationship, Brooke continuing to care despite the abuse, while Hulk remained emotionally unavailable and self-centered, even in what would become their final exchange. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time, keep the adventure alive by clicking on one of the suggested videos on your screen right now for more amazing content.